This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Julie Scanlon, and in this new series I'm excited to introduce you to coaches, experts and changemakers who share their insights on coaching women in the context of advancing systemic change. Our aim is to inspire and educate you to contribute to shaping to a more gender-equal world. Today I welcome Trish Brady, an experienced coach and coach supervisor, working independently as Trish Brady Consultancy. Trish supports organisations as well as individuals through her coaching practice. Today's conversation draws on her expertise and experience in her private practice coaching mature women from their 40s onwards, who are undergoing big changes in their professional or personal lives. We explore the deep identity level work that can emerge in coaching women who are navigating a complexity of challenges and shifts in their roles in the second half of their lives. For example, that of wife, mother or employee. We touch on the challenges of the sandwich generation and the inner and outer work required to support change. Hello and welcome. So we are here with our next guest on the Coaching Women series, who is Trish Brady, who is an experienced coach and coach supervisor working independently in her business. And today's conversation is drawing on her expertise from her private practice in coaching mature women. And we're using that term mature women to think about women sort of 40 years and above. And particularly wanted to look at this issue today because of these women who are encountering big changes in their personal or professional lives, which Trish sees very much in her clients. To kind of bring out some of that today would be fantastic. But I'm going to ask you, Trish, to just give us a little bit about your background, please, before we start our conversation proper.
Okay, good morning, Julie. It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I've got a very checkered background. I have done lots of things in my life. You know, I started off in biological sciences, working in labs. And I suppose most of my early career was in training and education. And that's really where I got my love for lifelong learning and development, I guess. I moved into public policy in the voluntary sector in the early 90s. And working in that organisation and becoming a senior manager there, I think was what really started me thinking about coaching and organisational development and how organisations work and how we can really support people to thrive and grow in organisations. And that was really my starting point. Was working with a fantastic team and really exploring how things might change and how we could really support people to work. And coaching at that time wasn't as well known as it was today. So I actually started off doing a counselling counselling course, which, although I didn't progress down that route, did really, I think, provide a great grounding for working in the room with people. It was a very, very experiential course. We did a lot of video practice that was then, we examined with the tutors and so got peer reflection on that. And that was, I think, really, really helpful to develop my skills as a coach. Mm-hmm. So when the time came for a big reorganisation in that organisation, I decided to go freelance and really sort of work on trying to be a coach and trying to develop my coaching practice. And that took a little bit of a while. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I ran a public policy consultancy kind of parallel to that in the first few years. And then 2005, I decided to float off and just do organisation development and coaching.
That's fantastic, Trish. Thanks so much. And then, so how did you come to specialise in your private practice in coaching mature women? How did that become a strand, really, that developed for you?
I think it was two things, Julia. I think one thing is, my own life, having a significant change at that time and going through all of those things myself and having that particular interest. And the other thing was, I suppose who gravitates towards you. And those were the kind of people women around my age and older who were coming to me. I was working with through a variety of, networks, friends of friends, business networking. And I suppose as I started to work with them, I realised there was this whole rich seam of work that it seemed to be particularly, I don't know, it appealed to me really because, I guess as we talk today, we'll explore more of what that means. But it's a kind of deep level of coaching that I find particularly interesting and rewarding.
Thank you. I like what you said there around sometimes it's our coaching clients really that gravitate towards us. So,
Yes.
yeah, the niche materializes as opposed to be chosen sometimes.
Exactly. I think if you're trying too hard to find your niche in coaching, then, maybe just a bit of reflection on what is coming towards you can be really quite helpful. And what you really enjoy.
Yeah. And sometimes there is that echo of what people may perceive as your own experiences as, a woman of a more mature age, for example. People kind of are drawn sometimes towards those identity markers that they perceive, whether they're kind of true or not sometimes, I think.
Yes, I think that's true. And although, my view of coaching is, that quite often ask in organisations how much experience you've got working in this sector or that sector. And I quite often say, well, none.
Yeah.
And that's good for you because I don't come with any assumptions. However, I think in the working in the private work, as you've described that I do my private practice, I think there is something of that, what you've gone through yourself does particularly inform your work. And I certainly found that at the outset, definitely. Yeah. And as I've got older, I think it's a generalization to say women over 40 because I work with women of all ages. And sometimes these, deep transitions do occur at different times. But certainly, I'm working with women in their 50s, 60s, and sometimes older than that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so that niche kind of forms, but of course we coach across the broad range according to, the clients that need us really. So I guess thinking about those women, the more mature women, as we're calling ourselves, include myself in that bracket. So what are some of the issues that you see your clients facing in these sort of middle stages and towards the later stages of their lives and career?
Yeah, I'd like to think a bit of a kind of second half of life, if you like, that we're exploring here. And I think that the challenges and issues that, and this is a broad generalisation. I'm not saying that men don't experience these things. And I think that this is based on my experience. Is that the women who I work with seem to have a kind of complexity of challenges at this stage, and instead of coming with, they might well come with one specific issue, and quite often it's related to work or context of work, but not always. And I suppose what I've found is that women, particularly, once they begin to work in coaching, the complexity of the issues that they're dealing with comes to the fore. It comes out in conversation quite often, quite early in that, probably like yourself, are doing an initial call or meeting with somebody to explore what their issues are. And they will be talking about work issues. They may want to move into a different sort of job, or they may want to progress in their career. They may want to think about leaving work or becoming self-employed. And at the same time, they're dealing with issues in their family. Their children may be growing up and leaving home. They may have issues with the menopause. That's quite a common one across quite a wide range of ages that women are dealing with. And of course, that's much more to the fore now than it was in previous years. Women in that age group as well, quite often they're what I think we call a sandwich generation. So they've got children, perhaps grandchildren of their own, and they're also dealing with elderly parents. Well, I say grandparents. I did once work with a woman of 50 who had children and just a new grandchild, and although her mum had died, she still had a grandma. So, there's a complexity of things, and I think that caring role can have a considerable impact. And I think the other thing that comes out is that there's a wider impact of those changes on family and partners as well sometimes.
Yeah. And you sort of mentioned there that sometimes a client will come with, perhaps it feels like one issue to them, but through the coaching relationship and process, the complexity comes out and you kind of tease out those kind of different frames and I suppose aspects of identity really that are coming to the fore within that. Can you elaborate a little bit on some of the, sort of how you see that process working, that kind of building of self-awareness, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, it's true that sometimes there isn't a clarity when people come. There's sometimes just a sense of unease and unhappiness about where they are. So I think the really the role of myself as a coach is to help them to explore that. And I think quite often what it comes down to is that at that stage, when we reflect on those complexity of issues, we're really unpacking and exploring roles that women have inhabited to that stage. So, wife, mother, employee. And sometimes, I think what I have found as a very strong theme within this work is that looking outside those roles is an important aspect of this, and I do regard it as coaching at identity level, Julie. I think that's fair to say in terms of reflecting on what you asked me there, because I think it does require a real deep level of work, and I think that's that is characteristic of the work, and it's I think that's partly why I've been drawn to it, is that it does require that depth of presence from the coach and an ability to sit with that kind of uncertainty and help women to do that unpacking, because it can be quite challenging as well, because it it really does challenge assumptions about ourselves and others around us, and allowing women to do that over a period of time. I quite often work with quite a common model, I guess, of working with about 6 sessions over 3 to 4 months, and I find it's a good time scale, I think, to do that sort of inner and outer work of coaching. So exploring assumptions, thinking about those beliefs and things we've taken for granted to do with those roles, but also thinking, starting to do some kind of practical things to change things. And I think that's as well reflects the scope of the work, is that it goes all the way from changing behaviours and looking at behaviours, sometimes looking at being assertive, setting boundaries, perhaps is one of the things quite often, and supporting women to do that. All the way up to, as we've talked about, really, who am I? And I suppose beyond identity as well. I think quite often, that sometimes what characterises this work is a sort of spirituality, and I don't mean that in any sort of religious sense. I mean that sometimes what I notice is that women are touching something about meaning and purpose, and it's not about, even if it comes as an aspect of about work, it's not just what is my next job going to be or whatever. It really is about crafting their life going forward and having that sense of who they are. I suppose it almost relates to that sort of Jungian sense of individuation, really getting to the sense of the core of who they are as a human being, beyond the kind of roles and tasks of everyday life that have quite often consumed them and are consuming them at that stage of life.
Yeah, there's so much there, Trish. That's wonderful to you speaking about that. I'm wondering about, we're talking quite a bit there about kind of roles and exploring those, sort of the change in roles and the change in identity as women mature. And you've talked a little bit about the sandwich generation as women have those caring responsibilities for different generations. And I'm just sort of wondering if we could reflect on where the concepts, and it's a big question, but where the concepts of those, just to forewarn, those roles, where do they come from as roles? Where is it that we that we see women feel they kind of need, in inverted commas, to inhabit the role of carer, of perhaps mother, of the sort of the wife or the partner, etc. Where are those frames? Where's the messaging around that coming from?
Well, I know that is a huge question.
It is, and I'm sorry. We don't need to answer it here in the few minutes we've got, but just to explore it a little would be great.
I think it's cultural. It's generational to a certain extent. I mean, it would be interesting to work with some of the women who are now in their 20s when they get to be that age. I don't know if I'll still be coaching then myself, but I think it is cultural, and it's around expectations, societal expectations. Quite often, I think women particularly take those on without question, or feel they don't have any option, or simply that's what they want to do at a certain stage in life. I'm not putting any kind of judgment on that. I think we, in our early stages of life, sometimes we fall into things, and then at a point in our lives, we start to reflect on those things, and it's not that those things have been wrong. It's that what do I do now? There's a kind of seismic shift at some point that I think quite often the clients, the people that I work with, are recognizing in that stage in life and saying, hang on a minute, life doesn't have to go on like this, and indeed it kind of can't go on like this, because there are different pressures coming in, and sometimes that caring responsibility comes out of the blue. Your parents are going along quite happily, and then suddenly something happens. A parent has a fall, or a bereavement perhaps, and then things take quite a big shift, and all of those things I think do bring about that real reflection, deep reflection about, okay, these are the roles that I've inhabited that have really supported and created my identity, going forward. And it's partly about taking control and recognizing that some things are outside of our control, and wanting to, have some agency in shaping that life going forward. And I think increasingly that's really important. Certainly working with older women in their 60s and beyond, is really thinking about that sort of sense of agency and how they take that forward. Does that answer your question? It was a very big question.
No, it was a massive question, and you've done brilliantly. Just kind of, give our listeners some food for thought there. And I'm interested in that, the term you just used there about kind of agency and sort of shaping, and particularly for older women, sort of 60s and beyond. And just even thinking from my own experience, sometimes women are thinking at that point, women that I coach around that age are thinking at that point, what do I want my legacy to be as I'm thinking about, ending my career, or sort of, shifting in some way, maybe going part-time, et cetera, et cetera. So people start thinking about legacy and, what are the marks that I want to have left, and in the remaining years that I want to work, what do I want to be doing with that? And I find that really quite joyful space to work with clients, because of that. They're really taking that agency that to use your word, and they are running with it. And it's like, this is how much further I want to work. This is what I want to do with it. And then they're going for it, which is quite a wonderful kind of space to be in sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, Julie, is that, sometimes the questions we're asking at this level of coaching is that kind of question, what do you want your legacy to be? Looking back on your life, what have you achieved, and what would you want to leave behind you? Because I think those kind of deeper questions do draw those sorts of answers. So we're not necessarily, although as I say, the scope does range from sometimes quite behavioural kind of challenges to address sometimes the relationship issues that arise, because as the person that you're coaching changes, the people around them are part of that change as well, and they're they're impacted by that. So I think those kind of deeper questions about legacy and what people leave behind and what they want what they see as their life's work or what they see as their purpose or meaning in life, I think is really a central part of that work. And as you say, quite often, I think it connects the coachee with something much deeper and bigger. And I think that the other thing that I notice about this work is that sometimes, women will come with a more contained issue about work, career, and as you described before, the field then broadens out as the coaching begins to explore all of these different issues. And sometimes I do help people to explore that at the beginning by asking questions about, what else is going on. And I think a good question to ask is why now? Right at the beginning, why are you coming now? And quite often that might be that they have got an issue of around career, but there's something else that's going on that's prompted that. And I think that's a really helpful place to begin to explore that. Sorry, I don't know whether I answered your question there or.
Yeah, certainly. And what's springing to mind is almost like it's that idea of a constellation of when the woman is changing, everything else is sort of shifting around her, and it's almost a two-way. It's a two-way thing. As you've mentioned, the example of you might suddenly need to take on some responsibility or wish to take on some responsibility if a parent has had a fall. So that kind of, you respond to that in a reactive way.
Yes.
But at the same time, we're also talking about some of these issues where women start to have more agency and kind of are proactive in shaping. So we've got all of the different, family members, friends, as well as people in the workplace who are sort of that interrelational stuff is very interesting. It's not just that one individual that's shifting.
It is, and I think part of the work is helping women to navigate that, all of that goes on. I think the thing that I was going to say there, Julie, as well, is that, as I say, sometimes you start off with a more contained issue, and we like objectives in coaching. We like to work towards goals, and I think this is sometimes an area of coaching where that isn't plain sailing. Sometimes there can be ups and downs and, explorations. And I think one thing that does strike me is that there's sometimes a big kind of paradigm shift that happens in that, perhaps objectives or things that women were thinking about when they came to coaching suddenly don't seem important anymore because there's something else that emerges. And I think there's something that as well that I've noticed, and I remember doing this with a woman who came to me probably about 10, 11 years ago now. And she was she had a very responsible position. She was a senior administrator in a higher education. She came very, very gloomy about her position at work. And she was just really looking to think about what her options were about leaving work, because it was something that she'd been doing a long time and it was a big thing to think about leaving. And whilst we were working, I think even in the first session, all of these other issues emerged. And it was particularly about her self-confidence, which was, impacted by lots of these things that we've talked about. And her ability to think beyond that sort of narrow frame. Whilst we were working, something shifted considerably. And when she came for the next session, I went out to the door. She rang the doorbell, and I went to the place that I was working. I went to the door to open it, and I didn't recognise her.
Wow.
She was completely different. I mean, not only was she wearing different clothes, she was, much kind of brighter and smarter and, not judgmentally, but just differently dressed.
Yeah.
But her face was different. There was something about the kind of tone of muscle tone, the micromuscle tone or something that had really shifted. And there was something that just radiated out of her. And I think that really just made me realise that sometimes these are kind of seismic shifts that happen. And sometimes that can be quite a subtle change, but it makes a dramatic kind of impact.
Yeah.
And that woman went on to learn how to be a coach, and she she messaged me on LinkedIn not so long ago to say what a great journey it had been, and yeah.
Oh, that's just a wonderful story, Trish. The power of coaching there.
The power of coaching, yeah, exactly. And you know, she'd gone on to really experience that as well, and I was so grateful for that, as well as for the other changes that happened for her.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful to hear that story, and yeah, the power, and that she went on to become a coach as well, having seen the impact that it can have with people. So well done on on aiding the profession in that way. I think it's, I think, you know, as we've been talking, we've been very much sort of thinking about kind of, I suppose, things that may appear to be going on in the workplace, but that then are, you know, become the sorts of bigger issues that are much more holistic and kind of 360 degrees, I suppose, around a woman's identity when she sort of hits certain ages and certain milestones when things are happening. And I was reading something recently which was around gendered ageism, really, in the workplace. You may have seen it. There was something in a Harvard Business Review last month by a researcher called Amy Deal and some others who talked about how women kind of we get it in the neck, whatever age we are, really, the you know, the kind of stereotypes and expectations around us. But she was, Deal and the other researchers were talking about women in the sort of 40s to 60s and then 60s onwards, having this, as we do, some of us kind of get a little bit more confident, start to care a little bit less about what the world says we're supposed to be doing. Again, don't wish to sort of stereotype, but when we're younger, all of that can seem much more important.
Yes.
And as some of those, we start to care less a little bit around those expectations of us. So we can be a bit more confident. We can show up sometimes, you know, more confidently in the workplace. But she talks about how in her research, she found that, you know, that was just another way to stigmatize women. You would be thought of sometimes as a bit bolshy, a bit overconfident, and men don't, on the whole, have those stereotypes. They have different stereotypes as they kind of mature. So I just thought it was interesting around that kind of the sense of how women progress through careers, always with something to kind of battle, I suppose, in the workplace. Some of those roles and the expectations around us to sort of always be pushing against or kind of thwarting in some way. So I thought that was interesting, that piece of research that came out last month only. I don't know if that kind of resonates with you around the clients that you work with.
I think so. I mean, I think it is an important aspect, and I think it's very much unrecognised, you know, as an ism. You know, I think we're very much better at dealing with lots of other aspects of diversity in the workforce, but I think that ageism does still exist, you know, in work and without work. I think that's really unfortunate. I remember there was a piece of work done quite a long time ago, maybe more than 10 years ago, about women leaders, and it was done from, I think, one of the Northeast universities. Julie, you might be aware of it. And I think basically what that said was, you know, get a coach as early as you can, because whatever you do, it's going to be challenging. You know, if you kind of exhibit traditional female sorts of behaviours, and again, that's very much a generalisation, you know, that's problematic. And if you exhibit, you know, more assertive behaviours, as you say, more kind of behaviours traditionally associated with men, and then that's problematic. So I think it is a challenge. I mean, I a sort of sub niche that developed for a while was that I quite often went down to London. So monthly I would be in London working, and the place that I worked was near Liverpool Street Station. So just because of geography, it attracted quite a lot of women who worked in the financial services, and there was, again, kind of broad strands that emerged. You know, some of those women wanted to get out of corporate life and do something different, either go self-employed or whatever. So there was that sort of transition around thinking about those sorts of things. And managing without, kind of high level of salary and those sorts of things. And other women wanted to kind of progress. And it's not my specific area of expertise, that corporate career development. But, they certainly did, highlight some of the challenges that were there that, were not necessarily about, ability or length of experience or qualification, but were, I suppose, political, with a small p, politics within the organisation, and ageism and sexism, I think, did play a part.
Yeah.
Now, that was a while ago, so I don't know how things stand now, kind of post-pandemic. And again, it is a generalisation, but I think, we have to recognise that those are challenges that I think particularly women, but older people in general, do face in the workplace.
Yeah, there's sort of the sense of, if you're younger, perhaps not being taken seriously, but then as you mature, there's sort of a tipping point which sort of is an invisible tipping point, and then suddenly you're encountering different issues. There's always those kind of challenges that people are facing. And you mentioned the finance sector there, and the sort of the more, what we might think of as the more corporate world, I suppose, which, as you say, isn't your specialism, and it's not mine either. But it's just made me think about the demands from most workplaces, really, on simply the time that work takes up, and kind of thinking about how a regular 9-to-5 role, or the longer hours that some people in some sectors are kind of expected to work, doing a 72-hour week or whatever, and how much those, if women had been in there from the start, particularly mothers been in there from the start, shaping what a workplace looked like, it wouldn't look like it does now. Even given the pandemic and some more flexibility, we're living with those traditions that were set up when there was an expectation that someone would be at home looking after the children, doing the housework, getting the shopping in, and yes, that someone would usually have been a woman. Whereas now we're in that women want those careers, quite appropriately so, and yet we haven't shifted how that hasn't quite worked out in society, how that balance figures out. We're still in those workplaces.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think, there was a shift towards that, probably starting in the 90s. And it's interesting you say that. And I find that not only in the corporate world, but I do a lot of work in the public sector, NHS and local authorities. And they particularly do extraordinarily long days.
Yeah.
Huge amounts of work, such that people don't really. And I think this is quite often people get into crisis at this point and recognise that they don't really have a life. Because not everybody has family and grandparents. Sometimes these are single women, and whether you've got family or not, that lack of kind of space outside work, I think, can be a challenge. And it's interesting, I think, that because there's a shift in values around work-life balance, what I do find is that people in their 50s and 60s are kind of taking up the slack for a younger generation who are simply saying, no, I don't want to do that. I want work-life balance, which is great. Yeah. But as you say, the workplace is set up to have a different kind of approach, and therefore, whether it's right or not, quite often people in their 60s are saying, 50s or 60s are saying, well, this has to be done, and therefore I have to do it.
Yeah.
So it is interesting, but I think the ageism thing is an important one, and I think, we talk about societies, and I think there are dwindling societies who value their elders. But I think there's definitely a thread going through, quite a toxic one sometimes, that I notice, which is really dismissing the views of people who've got an extensive amount of experience.
Yeah. Life
experience, work experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Then I see that dismissal as well, and it feels as though sometimes that experience and the value that the more mature people can add can potentially be lost if we're not careful to anything, really.
Yes, and I think that's important as well in terms of this kind of coaching at identity level. Is, as I say, sometimes it spans a whole range of work, from behaviours to values and belief skill sets and so on. And I think that can be very much about supporting women to kind of develop that level of kind of chutzpah that they need to deal with those things, and sometimes really exploring how, what they want to do in work. And sometimes that does unfortunately mean that they think, well, I want to go to somewhere that values me a little bit more.
Yeah, and sort of taking stock in that way kind of leads to that, the sense of purpose that you talked about earlier in a conversation, that people start to explore, what is it that I want to do? What is my purpose here? And do I want to be doing it in this workplace, or can it be carried out in some other way? Yeah. So that's very kind of values-based as well, it seems to me. For that individual. So, I mean, we've talked quite a lot today around this sense of women in the particular, I suppose, the sort of social responsibilities that women have still, that we are kind of placed on us more. We've talked quite a bit around caring. I guess I want to put in there, of course, we know that men care. Men have those responsibilities also. Yes. And simply kind of talking about, I guess, some of the challenges are about that. The pattern, the gendered pattern of expectations seems to be some of what's kind of come out for me a little bit from our conversation today. Whether those are kind of real for people and kind of, their choices have been deliberate choices, or they have kind of fallen into gendered patterns, whether you're a man or a woman or whomever you are, can be sort of really impactful. And there can be this moment where you realize, or you begin to realize through some of the coaching process, actually, what have I been doing? How have I got here? Is it where I want to be? Do I want to continue being here, or what is it? So there's sort of that kind of those transition moments that can come out in the coaching process through those moments of realization, I suppose. Yeah,
I think that's true. And I think you're right to say it's not only women. I'm sure there are men, working in coaching who are having those same, or not just men, but, coaches who are working with men going through those same kind of questions.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that is, and I think that's why it's such an interesting area of coaching, because it does touch on so many of these issues. And I think the having, as you say, having had that experience, having had some of those experiences, I think it is helpful. But, everybody is unique. And I think that's, quite often what I say in coaching is that quite often there are themes that develop that, that emerge that we recognize. But everybody has their own journey, and everybody, every single woman that I've worked with has manifested and navigated that journey in different ways, and come to different conclusions, and different options that have emerged. But I think, some of the things that we've talked about today, Junie, I think are really, really common in terms of what I've observed over, well, quite a long, kind of experience of being a coach, going back to the late 1990s, I guess. And it's been a kind of great privilege to do that work. I think, it's something that I really enjoy and that really energizes me. And I think that's, as I said, sometimes it really resonates with me, that kind of sense of that sort of Jungian concept of individuation, and also that, if anything changes, everybody changes. So it's a really kind of empowering sort of coaching to do. It's delightful to, walk alongside women doing this sort of work.
Yeah, it's brilliant to hear. I guess from your experience that you talked about there, from the late 90s to now, what are your thoughts on what coaches would benefit from being aware of when we're coaching mature women?
Well, I suppose going back to that sense of, the and I think this is not peculiar to this sort of coaching, is to recognise that what the presenting issue is not necessarily the whole thing, and be open to that exploration. really, I think is our duty as coaches to really help women to explore that. And also that, what might emerge along the way is a kind of paradigm shift. So I think really that sense of holding space, supporting, as well as doing our job of as coaches of reflecting and challenging, all of those things are important. But I think it's to be aware that all of those facets of being a coach are really important, and our ability to kind of flex into those different positions is important during that space, and not really to have any expectations except real sponsorship for that client. I think that if I was to choose one element which is above and beyond any kind of framework or tools or techniques or strategies that we might use as coaches, it's that sense of really sponsoring and unconditional positive regard. I think if we go back to the Rogerian kind of model, is incredibly important, because some of these challenges that women are going through, are massive. They are seismic shifts, I think, and to do that work of really challenging assumptions with people can mean that they deal within themselves and the people around them with quite a lot of challenges as a result. It's not plain sailing.
Yeah.
So I think those are things for coaches to be aware of in this context. Yeah.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I've kind of retaken your word sponsorship there is a really nice term.
Yeah, it's a lovely word, isn't it? It's in that sense of not thinking about, corporate sponsorship or whatever, but just really that holding that person in your heart and really, as I say, kind of unconditional positive regard and seeing them. I think I got from Judith Delosier, who was one of my teachers, one of my NLP teachers, and I think it's a sometimes overlooked aspect of coaching, and I think it's incredibly powerful, and especially in this sort of work, I think it's essential.
Thank you so much, Trish. I'm just wondering if you could let listeners know how they might get in touch with you if they wish to continue this conversation themselves. There will be on the show notes, but if people are listening, it can be handy to have you just let them know. Okay.
Yes. Well, I have a website. It's Trish Brady, trishbrady.co.uk. They can find me there. Or I'm also on the Life Coach Directory, which tells you a little bit more about this sort of work that I do. And so if you go on the Life Coach Directory and just search for my name or search for Coaches in Newcastle, you'll come across my profile there.
Thank you very much. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to leave as a final message for listeners?
I think we've had quite a wide-ranging discussion this morning, Julie. I'm not sure that we've missed anything. Just to say that it is a fascinating and really enjoyable work to be doing. And as you know, everybody should have a coach, Julie.
Everybody should have a coach. That's the final message. I love that as the final message. Thank you, Trish. It's been an absolute genuine pleasure speaking with you today, learning about your experiences and kind of thinking about these conceptual and the identity issues that we've been talking about today. There's so much to sort of delve into there. So I just want to say thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast series. I hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Julie. It's been great. I've been really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. There you can keep up to date with our latest podcast episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insights from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.